Hey everyone. My apologies for not having class this week. I'm feeling much better, but I still don't have a great voice. So I'm gonna keep this video pretty short, and we're gonna go over two similar stitches that are worked in a line. So I've got this one here, which is a series of these green stitches and then a woven stitch on top with the pink, which you already know how to do. This is just a basic weaving in and out here. And then this one, we're actually going to start with this one. This one's called a butterfly chain. You can see it sort of looks like a butterfly chain that way. This little guy here is called the sheaf stitch. And then when you do a whole bunch of them in a row, you get a butterfly chain. And so these yellow stitches are done through the fabric, and then this pink stitching is all done on top. It's another weaving stitch where you don't penetrate the fabric. So the way that you do each of these is if you don't have a felt rectangle on top of your fabric, that's fine. You can work it in any kind of straight line. And so what I did, you can barely see my purple erasable pen mark that's left. I drew just a straight line for each of these, and each one of them is worked by doing a series of stitches through the fabric. And so this one here, where the stitches go parallel to your line, is this one here with the loops, and then where the stitches go perpendicular to your drawn line, that is going to be the butterfly chain. And so I did all different orientations for my butterfly wings here. Traditionally, you would just do 3 in a row for your sheaf stitch. Looks like a sheaf of wheat that's tied up in the field there. But you can get a different effect by doing your 3 stitches in different ways, so that we'll see what all those look like after we go through this. And then this one is super simple. So we're going to start with this one and then we'll do the butterfly. So I've already got all of my stitches done because you really don't need to see that happen. It's so simple. They're just little straight stitches. So I'll just do one group of them. I did it right on my line, and I started with the center line because that was easier for me to sort of eyeball where they went. If I started in the center, there's one. So there's my 3 straight stitches, and then I can just knock that off on the back. I've been tugging on my fabric, so my line got a little crooked, but you could, of course, always really measure out. If you wanted this to be nice and even, you could measure out, of course, the distance between each of these groups of 3 stitches so that it would be nice and even. You could also alternate, maybe like close together, far apart, close together, far apart, and that will dictate the size of your little loops that get woven in. So that's up to you. On this one, I did a few variations as well. So I've got a longer stitch in the middle. This one's just a little X, 2 stitches, which I thought was pretty cute. So you can play around with that as well. It does not have to be these 3 stitches. But I am going to go ahead and knot off on the back. You can see what that looks like. I'll just do this real quick. Okay. And then we'll move on to our little loops. So for this one over here, I started back here on my line. You could also start underneath your 3 little stitches here. Doesn't matter. I'm going to start back here. And now that I've come up from the bottom and I've checked my knot is nice and taut back here, now as we've learned the hard way so many times, I'm going to lead with the eye of my needle. And I'm just going to go under all 3 stitches. And here's where I kind of want to decide if I want them all to be the same or if I want them to be different, but this is all going to be about tension. So I'm going to put my thumb, let's say I like the size of that loop. I'm going to put my thumb over this so that when I go through the alternate way on my next group, when I pull on it, I don't lose this by pulling too hard. Because if I pull too hard on this, they're both going to tighten up. So again, if I want to be really nice and neat about this, I could actually draw a series of 3 lines so that I know where the top of my loop should be. But I'm just going to go in and out, in and out, in and out here. Okay, I'm just going to come up. Now, what I would recommend is, depending on how long the line of your stitches is, at some point, it's a good idea, because this is so heavily reliant, I already pulled this one tighter than I wanted to, because this is so heavily reliant on the tension. It's not a bad idea to every once in a while to go underneath, tie a little knot, and then come through. That way, if you tug too hard, you don't have to redo all of the tension on all of your loops. So just every once in a while, if you've got a long string of these, go ahead and tie it off so you don't have to worry about that. But when you get to the end here, like when I got down here, this is when I did go underneath. You can see a little space there that I went underneath, and I did tie a knot there, and then I started again. And if you didn't like the way that this looked, you could then go back with your green thread and put something over the top of that if you wanted it to have the same look. So this is part of, gosh, where did I put the name of it? Let's see if I've got it right here. Oh, yes, it's called, oh gosh, who speaks French? Gouache. So this is a combination of many, many stitches. So this is actually the stem stitch here, these 3 little straight stitches, which they're calling a satin stitch because it's a grouping of 3 stitches. And then there's a French knot, and then this interlacing on top. So the gouache is actually a combination of stitches that create this border. But basically what we're doing is we're just weaving, which we learned, I think, in our first class. So that's that one. That is simple, simple, simple. So we're going to move on from that quickly, and we're going to go into this interlaced butterfly stitch. I don't even need to worry about this thread. I'm going to pull this out so I can use it. Knot this off, and we're going to get into the butterfly. The butterfly is a little, it's not tricky, but it's definitely less simple. So let's move on to that. Now, like so many of our stitches, this one has the first stitch is done a little bit differently than the rest. Let's see if I can zoom in here. Okay, that looks good. All right. So for our first, well, we'll call it a sheaf stitch, because if you're only doing one of these, it's a sheaf stitch. So we'll start out like we're just doing one, because the first stitch starts out that way. So for the first one, what we're going to do is you're going to start with your set. You've already done your series of lines here, and then we're going to start with our second color of thread, our contrasting thread. And I'll just sort of draw myself a middle line to be able to see, since that's faded. Okay. So for this first one, I'm going to come up on one side of my line. You can see I'm coming up to the left of my drawn line. And okay. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back down on the right side of my line. Okay, so I've got a big loop. We're used to dealing with these big open loops at this point. Now I'm going to come back up on the opposite side of my 3 stitches. Oops, and I'm going to get close to my 3 stitches here. Okay. And I've got my loop, but I'm going to add a little twist to my loop here. So I'm just going to loop. Whoops. Okay. I'm going to try this again. Make this loop a little smaller so you can see what I'm doing. I'm going to come all the way through. Okay, here's my loop. Now I'm going to add a twist to my loop. So you can see that it's like a figure 8 here. Okay, I'm still going to come up through the top part of my loop. And I'm going to pull on this. And the only difference from like when other stitches that we've done is that I have this figure 8 twist in my loop. When I pull, let's see if we can get a nice close up here. When I pull, you can see this little X here. So that gives me this extra little loop shape. Let me draw that. Need some paper. So here were my 3 little stitches. I came up here, I went back down here, and then I came up over here. So up, down, back through the fabric. I went underneath the fabric under my stitches, popped back up here with my needle, and then my thread that I had was like that. And I came back up through my loop so that I've got this little ribbon shape. Okay, so that was my first stitch. Now, from here on out, we are just going to work on top of the fabric. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you that one more time. So I'm just going to go tuck underneath here. Okay, now if I just wanted to do a sheaf stitch, that would be it. I'd pull a little tighter actually, but ignore that. I'm going to do this again. So pretend this doesn't exist and we're starting from the beginning. Okay, so I'm coming up here to the left of my line, going back down on the right. Here's my loop. I'm coming back up right on the middle. Okay, not through my blue stitches, but I've got my loop and I'm going to do my little figure 8. So you can see both sides. There's one side too. I'm going to come up through this top loop. I'm going to pull. My figure 8's getting smaller. Okay. Now, to really do my sheaf stitch, there we go. I pulled up on this and that tension drew those 3 little stitches into the middle. I gave them a little waist there, like I put a belt on my sheaf of wheat. So that again is stitch number 1 in your butterfly chain. So stitch number 1 is like a sheaf stitch. Okay, now moving on, like I said, from here on out, you're only going to be working on top of the fabric. So what you're going to do here is, this is 2 hands, right? I've got my right hand, I'm holding my needle, and in my left hand, I've got the tail. So I'm going to lead with the eye of my needle here, and I'm going to go underneath all 3 stitches. Now, with my tail, I'm going to come up over the top of my 3 stitches. I'm going to loop underneath. I'm going to do that again. Tail in my left hand, needle in my right. I'm slipping underneath all 3 stitches. Now my tail is going to come on top of all 3 of those stitches, slip underneath my needle, Now I'm going to pull this through. This is a tension thing again. I'm going to pull on this tail to keep that tight. And when I pull on this, I have now tightened my little sheaf of wheat, made my little butterfly wings. Okay, and I've got this long, this chain, this, I'm sorry, this like little tail here that's connecting that. So let's do that again. Still working on top of the fabric. Okay, tail in my left hand, needle in my right, leading with the eye of my needle, slipping the needle underneath all 3 threads. My tail goes on top of all 3 threads, and I'm like wrapping it around and behind. Pull it tight. There I go. Put a belt on it. I'm going to do that again. Needle, eye first, slips under all 3 threads. Okay, got my tail over here, does not go underneath. It goes on top and wraps around. Now, again, I don't think it matters which way you do this as long as you're consistent. So when I do it, I'm putting my needle through sort of at an angle from bottom right to top left, and then I'm making like an X, and I'm crossing over from bottom left to top right and behind. As long as you're doing it the same every time, I think it'll look the same. Again, I'm just sort of making sure that this little end piece is a little bit tight as I pull, and those come together. So here, this one's like more like a little bit of an asterisk because I had the longer thread in the middle. Just an aesthetic choice. All right, needle goes under all 3 threads. Okay. Whoops, I went too far. I got distracted. I'm pulling that out. Okay. Needle goes under all 3 threads. Here's my tail coming up with my left hand over and wrapping it around. Pulling it through. Last one. I just have a little tiny thread in the middle there. That doesn't matter as long as I go through all 3. Okay. Wraps behind. And there we go. So that's that. And then I can just tuck this underneath and be done. Okay. So my little thread was so short in that one, it didn't really show. It just looks like a little X. But the key here is that the tension is that when you pull that through, you pull those 3 stitches together, and it gives them this little star shape instead of this one where I didn't pull it tight. There's still 3 parallel lines on my threads. So the other, it's not even a stitch, but the other sort of decorative element that I was going to suggest that we work on in the class that I was not able to have was that you may have had an open square or circle of felt on your hoop from last time. And what I was going to suggest is that you put a grid of thread over the top. That can be a really tight grid where your threads are very, very close together, or a big open grid where you leave yourself room to put a stitch in. There's not really anything to actually teach you here because it's just stitches that go over the top of your shape. So, for example, you can start, again, measuring and laying out your grid would be a really nice way to get a very evenly spaced, very geometric grid. If you want to eyeball it, I would suggest pulling up your first thread and sort of finding the angle that you want to stick with, and then working from side to side to get parallel lines. So there's my first one. So for my second one, to save thread, I don't need to go all the way underneath and like wrap around. I can just come up right next to it here. want to keep it parallel, I can, you know, pull my thread over here until I'm using just the naked eye to see if that's parallel. Looks close enough for me. Okay, and then sorry about that. My camera got a phone call. Let me see if I can switch. Got to fix my camera here. Sorry about that. There we go. So you can continue to work all the way to one side and then to the other, or you can go back and forth, which would probably be the best way to get a really nice parallel line to keep them even and keep your measurements even. So not the way I'm doing it. See, I'm a little bit wide here. This is a little bit bigger. I think it would probably be helpful visually to work left, right, left, right. But for the sake of this, we're going to do this. Okay, and I would recommend doing them all in one direction and then coming back the other way. I'm going to skip ahead. Okay, again, sort of find that perpendicular angle visually, or if you want to not be perpendicular, that's fine too, whatever you're going for aesthetically. But when I hold this here with my thumb and I get the point of my needle underneath that line, I know I'm going to keep it the same. So there we go. So I'm laying out my grid here now. Once you get your whole shape gridded out, these threads are very loose. They can get caught on things. Depending on what you're doing, maybe that's fine. But if you want to tack those into place, what you want to do is get another thread. It's fun to do it in a contrasting thread if that's part of your design, but you can see here I just tacked with little X's, or on the sides I just did a little line. Just tacked these down. So all you have to do is come up and go across the top of where each of these gridded threads cross paths. And that is all you have to do. And it's so little, and so you can hide it, or you can do a big fat X there for visual effect. And so this is fun. Like I could stitch like a French knot. I could just put a dot in between here. I could put a circle in here, a star. I mean, whatever. This is like a really fun visual pattern. You can also, if you're not working with felt, you can do a satin stitch in any shape that you want, and you can lay a grid over the top of it for visual effect. And it can be pretty striking is what I was trying to say there. So that's what I would suggest for this week, if you have time, is to put either one of these, either your butterfly or these loop-de-loops on your rectangle. You could also just work that in a line anywhere on your hoop. Do a grid on top of any other big blank space. And then next time for our last class, we're going to be working with these little spaces here. I only have 2 on my hoop. So what I might do, I haven't decided yet. I may use my pen here to mark out like a border around one of these shapes. And so I may work with this triangle, and this long skinny space around here. We'll see. I haven't decided, but that's what we're going to be working with next time. So thanks for your patience, and hopefully I will see you all for our next and last Zoom embroidery class. Thank you.